All right, Pitt got a win, and that's a step in the right direction, but there's still plenty of things for the Panthers to clean up as they head into this week's game at Wake Forest. We're talking about some of the biggest question marks still facing Pitt as they head into another conference game on today's Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Wet Blanket Tuesday here on the old Morning Pit. We're going to take all of your optimism and excitement about this team. They finally get off the schneid and beat an FBS team, win an ACC game, 38-21 upset over Louisville. We can no longer say number 14 Louisville. They've dropped down to, I think, number 21 in the AP poll. So they're still ranked, still a top 25 team, but not quite. It's not quite as impressive when you say a top 25 team as opposed to a top 15 team. But we know how important that win was, regardless of Louisville's ranking, regardless of anything about the Cardinals and what you think of Jeff Brom and his program. The reality is Pitt needed a win, and they got a win. So we're not going to throw a wet blanket on that, but we do have a few things we got to talk about, some areas that Pitt still needs to make considerable improvements and take some big steps forward, and that's what we're going to talk about on today's Morning Pit. You know what we always ask you to do? Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. These daily Morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday, a little bit of Pitt sports talk to get you ready for the day, to get your day started. We have our weekly live show we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Me and Jim Hammett will get together tomorrow night to hang out with you for an hour to talk Pitt sports. We'll take your comments and questions and have those conversations, as always, real fun. And then our post-game show. We'll have our live post-game show this week after the Wake Forest game on Saturday. That game is, a 3:30 kickoff, so I'm guessing we'll be live around 7 or a little after. That should be a lot of fun as well. We'll talk for an hour or however long we need to talk to cover all the big topics surrounding Pitt's game at Wake Forest and the outcome thereof. And so you want to make sure you don't miss any of that video content, any of those live streams or any of these daily videos. Like this video and subscribe. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the best place to get the Pitt video content, and the best place to get your Pitt sports news is right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's got everything. Pitt football, Pitt basketball, Pitt recruiting, Pitt message boards, other Pitt fans, people talking about Pitt sports all day, every day. It's what's going on at Panther-Lair.com is Pitt stuff. And so you want to be a part of it, go check it out. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. All right, let's talk about this team. Let's talk about some of the areas of improvement, some things they need to get better at heading into this Wake Forest game. Because, what they did against Louisville was really good. Very, very good performance on both sides of the ball. Upside and downside, I think, on all three phases. I think they had some elements of their special teams that were pretty good, and then they had some pretty questionable elements. I think offense and defense both had its real highlights and then also had its lowlights. I talked a lot yesterday about how Pitt's defense, in my view, sort of won the game on Saturday by pitching a shutout in the second half, forcing 4 turnover on downs, 2 interceptions, a punt, and a missed field goal on Louisville's 8 drives. Louisville getting into Pitt territory on 5 of those 8 drives and still coming away with 0 points was a pretty strong performance from the Panthers defense, but they gave up those drives. They let them move into Pitt territory. They got there in the first place. So while we give the defense credit for standing up when it was time to stand up, and making some big stops there, we also have to point out that you let them get to that point to begin with, and that's not exactly good defense. We'll talk about that. And then, of course, the offense, scoring 4 offensive touchdowns for the first time in an FBS game this season. They never had more than 3, and I think that was the Cincinnati game. They scored 3 offensive touchdowns. And was it one more? I wrote them all down. It's not hard to write them all down. 3 offensive touchdowns against Cincinnati, none against West Virginia, 2 against Carolina, 2 against Virginia Tech. And so getting 4 offensive touchdowns, big step in the right direction, right? A big improvement, good passing coming out of Christian Veilleux, the new starting quarterback, some of the receivers making some really good plays, Gavin Bartholomew involved to some extent. But ultimately, they ended up with 288 yards of total offense. That's not exactly a strong performance. That's not exactly the kind of performance that you need to have, to win games consistently. I think they barely got over 100 yards in the second half. It's hard to, close out games when you get 100 and I think they had 111 yards of offense after halftime. I mean, even if you have a lead and Pitt, was not playing with a lead at halftime. They had to come back. It's hard to come back, and it's hard to play with to protect a lead and hold on to it in college football if you're not really moving the ball yourself. A big part of protecting a lead late in games, in the second half of a game, third or fourth quarter, is not just making stops on defense, but it's about time of possession and holding onto the ball and keeping the other team's offense on the side. Because in college football, teams are going to score. I mean, it's a rarity to pitch a shutout in the second half like Pitt's defense did, particularly when the other team gets 8 possessions. If you give another team 8 possessions, you're probably going to give up a touchdown or two in most instances, and then your lead is no longer protected because you're giving up points. So they need to do a better job there. I mean, they need to win the time of possession in the second half. They need to gain more yards. They need to keep it moving better. You know what I mean? They need to generate more offense. Going sub 300 yards is not going to do it. And that brings us to Christian Veilleux. Christian Veilleux, 12 of 26 in that game. I should know this stat right off the top of my head by this point. And even 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. To be quite honest, 12 of 26 is not that far off from some of the stat lines Phil Dracovic had earlier this season when we were killing him for going 10 of 32 or 8 of 20 or whatever it was. I mean, there's not a huge difference between 12 of 26 and some of those stat lines. Those stat lines from Dracovic may have been worse, but this is still a sub 50% performance. And in the second half, Veilleux was 5 of 11 for 63 yards. He threw a touchdown, but that touchdown came on like his final pass of the game, and it was a 31-yard throw. So, 1 out of his 5 completions and 31 out of the 63 yards that Veilleux put up in the second half all came on that final throw, that 4th down pass to Konate Mumpfield, which was, to be fair, probably the prettiest pass we have seen from a Pitt player all season. I mean, that was beautiful. It was a great route by Konate Mumpfield. He dropped the ball right in there. It's perfect. But you go 5 of 11 for 63 yards in total in the second half. That's not good enough. Veilleux went 1 of 4 in the fourth quarter. 3 incomplete passes and then that touchdown throw. So that leaves something to be desired. And I sort of felt like, all right, you're not going to win many games if your quarterback only completes 12 passes. As a matter of fact, you're probably not going to win many games if your quarterback completes less than 20 passes. And so I started looking around, and I was looking at quarterbacks who won this week. And I looked at the quarterbacks in the ACC who won games this weekend, and I looked at quarterbacks in the top 25 who won games this weekend. And out of the top 25 teams, and not everybody was in action, but there were 12 teams that won with their quarterback completing fewer than 20 passes, less than 20 completions. And you have some cases where like Michigan just crushed Indiana. So J.J. McCarthy was 14 of 17. I mean, it's hard to argue with that performance. He threw 222 yards with 3 touchdowns, 14 of 17. Drew Aller at Penn State, they beat UMass 63-0. So he went 16 of 23, but how many passes did he really need to complete? Kyle McCord, same thing, 41-7 win over Ohio State, or over Purdue for Ohio State. Sam Hartman went 13 of 20 for Notre Dame against USC in a really ugly game where Caleb Williams was actually the worst quarterback on the field as opposed to usually where he's the best quarterback on the field. Alabama beat Arkansas 24-21. Jalen Milroe goes 10 of 21. Actually completed fewer passes than Christian Veilleux did. And actually, if you look at the top 25 teams, you look at the ACC, just taking ACC teams and top 25 teams, of all the quarterbacks who won this weekend, there were only 2 who completed fewer passes than Christian Veilleux. It was Milroe at Alabama with 10 completions, and Henry Beelan at Duke, who took over for Riley Leonard, was 4 of 12 for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns and 1 pick. The thing that you find, though, when you look through... Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, Joe Milton at Tennessee was 11 of 22 for 100 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. And Tennessee won that game. They beat A&M 20-13. So there's 3 quarterbacks, 2 in the top 25 and 1 in the ACC. I mean, I guess Beelan is technically, Duke is in the top 25 as well. My point is this. It's hard to win games with that few completions, but there's a key stat within that. When you look at all these guys, you look at the 12 quarterbacks who won, games in the top 25 this past weekend and completed fewer than 20 passes. Those 12, 9 of those 12 did so without throwing an interception. Buellen threw one for Duke, Milton threw one for Tennessee, and Brady Cook threw one for Mizzou in their 38-21 win over Kentucky. You can get away with minimal completions if you protect the ball, if you don't make mistakes. And again, we're going to come back to something we said after the game on Saturday, something I said yesterday, something Pat Narduzzi said yesterday during his press conference. He didn't make mistakes. He had some near misses. He had a couple throws that you were like, oh, dude, don't throw that. There was one that I wrote it down in my notes, almost intercepted. He had a pass to Gavin Bartholomew that it was like, he's looking down the middle of the field to Gavin Bartholomew. Or it might have been Bub Means, actually. It was Bub Means. And, like, right in his line of view, if you drew a straight line from there to Means, there were two guys right along that line, two Louisville defenders. And if either one of them had the presence of mind to realize what was happening, they could have got their hands on the ball to either knock it down or intercept it. Now, Veilleux's arm strength and the considerable zip he puts on the ball helped him in that situation because the ball went by so fast that those guys couldn't really react in time to knock it down. But he largely didn't take a lot of chances. He didn't put the ball in jeopardy. I don't want to say he didn't take chances because he took some shots down the field. He tried to throw deep a few times and was successful a few times. But by and large, he didn't put the ball in jeopardy. He didn't risk the ball with turnovers. And if you're only going to complete 12 passes, you really have to make sure that you're not throwing interceptions. You're not moving the ball down the field all that much. You're not picking up that much in the way of passing yardage. You've got to make sure the ball's not going to the opponent. And I think that was my biggest takeaway looking at this, that, Drake May was 17 of 33 against Miami, but he threw 4 touchdowns and no interceptions. Same thing. JJ McCarthy, he only completed 14 passes. We threw 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Kyle McCord, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Drew Allard, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Sam Hartman, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. This a week after Hartman threw 3 picks against Louisville and lost that game. And you want to look at Jack Plummer, throws 2 interceptions and fumbles. They lose the game. And it's not as easy as that. It doesn't just come down to that, but that's the most important thing that Veilleux has to do, in addition to some of those really nice passes that he was making. So I think that's a big part of it. My biggest question now with Veilleux, we saw what he did. The question is, can he win a game? All right. So Pitt was able to come back from that halftime deficit. They got a touchdown from MJ Devonshire. That helps. They also scored 2 offensive touchdowns in that half as well, in addition to a field goal. Pretty good. But they carried a lead into the fourth quarter, and they had a rather comfortable lead. I think, what was the lead by the fourth quarter? They were up by 10 heading into the fourth quarter, and then they add that 1 touchdown late. I need to see Veilleux do a better job closing out the game. Like I said, he missed on 3 passes to start the fourth quarter before he finally hit the touchdown pass to Konate Mumfield. He needs to do a better job. I shouldn't say he needs to do a better job closing out the game. This was his first career start, his first extended playing time, his first time really being in this situation. One of the things he's going to have to show and develop is closing out games. And that means completing more passes. Whether you're protecting a lead or you're trying to come back, you need to complete more passes while also keeping those interceptions down to 0. So that's a big part of it. I thought they did a good job protecting. They need to keep that up. Veilleux, I was looking at his passing stats. Find the pressure and depth here on Pro Football Focus. He was under pressure on 79% of his dropbacks. Or no, excuse me. The other way around. He was kept clean on 79% of his dropbacks, according to Pro Football Focus. Under pressure on just 21%. That's a great number. That's an amazing number. Better than anything Phil Dracovic saw this year. Even the Wofford game, he was under pressure more than that. And this with their 5th offensive line combination in 6 games. And so great job there. Keeping him protected is huge. Conversely, they need to keep getting after the quarterback. This past week, they had 20 defensive pressures. Now, I'm flipping over to Pitt's defense here. 20 defensive pressures. It's the most they've had in any game this season. They end up with 4 sacks. That's good. They need to keep getting that pressure and not always having to rely on the blitz to get it. I mean, Jack Plummer was under pressure for what? Well, they credited with 15 of his dropbacks, but they credited 20 pressures for Pitt's defensive players. But they blitzed, according to Pro Football Focus, Plummer was, blitzed 52% of the time. And so you're not going to be able to always, 42% of the time. He was blitzed 42% of the time. You're not going to always blitz damn near half of the dropbacks. You're going to try and get more pressure out of the front four, and they need to work on getting pressure out of the front four without those blitzes. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. But setting a new season high in pressures, getting after the quarterback and getting 4 sacks, that's a positive step. That's a step in the right direction for the pass rush. Back over to the offense, the run game needs to improve. This game on Saturday, Rodney Hammond and Sebo Flemister, 24 carries for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns. Flemister had the 2 touchdowns. That's 3.2 yards per carry. That's not good enough between the 2 running backs. But the final 6 carries over the last 3 drives of the game gained a net total of 7 yards. So 6 carries for 7 yards on those final 3 drives when they were trying to kill the clock. Louisville knew they were trying to kill the clock, knew they were just going to hand it off and try and run it and run the clock down. You take those out, you got 18 carries for 70 yards before that between Hammond and Flemister. That's just about 4 yards per carry. It's 3.9. It's pretty close. Panarduzzi said yesterday that Louisville's run defense is a good run defense. They have a strong defensive front. They're good at stopping the run, so that was probably a challenging assignment to run against that group, particularly with the new offensive line. But getting pretty close to 4 yards per carry is solid for Hammond and Flemister. They need to do better, though. It's going to be interesting to see as we move forward through the season if Christian Veilleux keeps connecting on some of the passes, like the pass to Bub Means, the long pass to Means, or the long pass to, the longish pass to Mumfield, or the good pass down the sideline to Kenny Johnson, and some of the throws he made to Gavin Bartholomew, and so on and so forth. If he continues hitting on those, does it loosen up the run defenses that Pitt is facing and give Pitt more of an opportunity to get the run game going and actually achieve some of that balance in the offense that they need? They're calling plays like they have a balanced offense, but they're not getting the success they should have from a balanced offense. Is it really not establishing the run effectively? Wake Forest, not a great run defense. From what we can tell, I think had the Virginia Tech at 36 carries, rushing attempts for 141 yards and a touchdown, kind of again going for the volume play like they did against Pitt, just running the ball a ton and largely effective. Kyron Drones had 15 carries for 59 yards. Malachi Thomas, 6 for 35. Tootin, who looked unstoppable against Pitt, was held to 2.3 yards per carry. But, another opportunity here for Pitt to try to build their run offense and get their run game going and see if they can get something, generate more there after having a little bit of success in the passing game, albeit one with only 12 completions. And then we flip back over to defense, and they need to improve the run defense. I've said I talked about this on the post game. I talked about this yesterday. Louisville's running backs combined to average almost 5 yards per carry. They averaged 100. They ran for 127 yards. Got 27 on 27 carries. It's 4.7 yards per carry. They got 113 yards after contact. It's averaging about 4.2 yards per attempt. For Louisville's rushing attack, we're taking out the sack numbers there and just looking at designed runs between the running backs and Jack Plummer. 4.2 yards per attempt after contact is not a good number, and it speaks to some tackling issues that are still persistent. Now, Pro Football Focus said that Pitt missed 13 tackles on Saturday. That's about half as many as they missed against Virginia Tech, so that's an improvement, but still too much of a problem and giving the opponent too many extra yards. You just can't afford to do. You can't afford, and I think that's probably, if I was going to sum up this whole thing, I would say that there were a number of things Pitt did against Louisville that they just can't afford to do, or they need to improve, and they can't do it to the degree that they did it against Louisville. You can't have that many missed tackles and give up 113 yards, yards after contact. You can't complete only 12 passes. You can't complete only one pass in the fourth quarter. You can't average 3.2 yards per carry. You need to be better at a lot of these things. You can't go 5 of 11 for 63 yards and a touchdown in the second half. Even if you are protecting a lead, you have to be able to use the passing game to help protect that lead if you find yourself in a situation to do so. So, definite step in the right direction on Saturday. Definite positives to take from that win. Most of all, that it's a win. Now you've got to fine tune and hone and keep improving so that you can keep winning. So that, if you don't shut out Wake Forest in the second half, if they have 8 possessions and they might score on 1 or 2 of those, you are capable of combating that and give yourself a chance to stack wins heading into the Notre Dame game and see what happens. So there's a few things that stood out to me as just sort of question marks that linger even after the win. I'm sure we'll have plenty of more things to talk about as we move through the week. We'll be talking about some of the youth movement that we've seen from Pitt so far, really in recent weeks on both sides of the ball. Some younger players getting playing time, what that means for the Panthers going forward. We'll keep talking about Christian Veilleux. We'll keep talking about Wake Forest. We'll keep talking about the win over Louisville. Keep talking about everything that's been going on in the world of Pitt sports, all right here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you don't miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content. And then head over to Panther-Lair.com for your latest Pitt sports news. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. It's been a lot of fun, and we appreciate your patronage. And have a great Tuesday. Hope your week's been off to a good start. We will catch up with you tomorrow on the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.